Well, thank you so much for having me. I just want to say it's an honor to be here. I want to thank First Five and the Audacious Foundation both for bringing me to Santa Barbara. I've been having conversations with folks for a while. I'm always really interested in working with communities that are really committed to pediatric health equity. So tremendous thank you. It's been an honor to be here. I arrived yesterday. I left Seattle. I live in Seattle. I work in Seattle. It was 40. It was pouring rain. I was freezing. I have like a puffy jacket in my luggage, and I landed in Santa Barbara, and I was like, wow, this is a whole new world here, right? I've never been here. So I was actually born in California, so I spent the first 15 years of my life in Northern California, so California has a special place in my heart, so thank you for having me. So the title of my talk today is Nature and Health Equity in Childhood, So Many Mysteries. Thank you for the introduction, and we will keep moving on. I want to start with a land acknowledgement, and I am going to read this. I think it's important. We are gathered on unceded ancestral lands of the Barbareño, Chumash, and Chumash peoples who have stewarded this land for countless generations and continue to live here. In acknowledging native lands, we can begin to shine a light on histories that go untold of the theft and colonization of native resources. We wish to honor the original, current, and future inhabitants of this beautiful land. So roadmap of my talk today, I'm going to start with sort of the state of affairs. This is background. What do we know and what are we doing with what we know? The next, I'm going to go into the call of significance, which is what role does research have? Why schools are really essential, a little bit about nature learning and neuroscience and nature and creativity, and then I'm going to land with next steps and a beginner's mindset and how to incorporate play, fun, and wonder. And I'll land at the very, very end why I think this really matters. So this is not the first slide you might anticipate from an academic presenting. There's a poop emoji, there's some pictures, and the title of this slide is So Many Mysteries, and I really want to start here because it contextualizes my work. I titled this talk from a 3-year-old who I met in a park because I was out on a walk and doing my thing, and this group of like 3 kids started walking up the trail, and they were really like in it. They were chatting, they were just really like engaged, chatting. They didn't even see me, so much that like they didn't see me on the trail. So I was sort of moving to the side, and they like completely surrounded me because they were just like, oh, you're here, we're moving around you. But then this little girl looked up to me and she saw me and she said, you have no idea what we've just found. I said, you're right, I have no idea what you just found. And she said, we heard a woodpecker, but we couldn't see it. We looked, and she said, it's a pileated woodpecker, and I know that it's here, this is the habitat. She went on and on about the woodpecker. And then she said, we found a glove, but just a single glove. We have no idea who it belongs to. And the third, she said, and we found poop. And kids love to talk about poop, right? We know this. And I know this because I study poop. One of my health outcomes that I look at is gut microbiome health, so I have to collect poop from kids. And let me tell you, what makes me cool is that I study poop. They call me the poop scientist. When they see me, they're like, the poop scientist is here, this is excellent. And she said, we found poop. And we're certain that it's coyote poop because it has hair. And dog poop doesn't usually have hair. And she paused and she looked at me and she said, so many mysteries. And I thought, that's it, right? Okay, so what do we know? There's a lot to know. There's a lot of literature in this space. And so in 2021, I published a paper with a number of colleagues and folks who I'm privileged to call friends in pediatrics, and it was systematically reviewing all the literature to date that had been published about the association between nature and children's health. And here's what we found. On the far left, you'll see health outcomes. The middle columns are study designs. Please ignore that unless you're interested. And the strength of evidence is on the right. And so the green rows, we found that there was a high strength of evidence that time outside promoted physical activity and promoted cognitive, behavioral, and mental health. This systematic literature review we thought was going to be a small feat. It was a very large feat because there were 300 articles that we summarized. Typically, literature reviews are in the 50 to 75 range, so there was a huge number of articles to summarize, so that's why we felt like we had high strength of evidence. These other health outcomes, I want to be clear here, this does not mean that nature does not benefit kids in these ways. It just means that we need more information. We need more evidence. And so We also left the systematic literature review feeling really excited that we have very concrete information that nature improves health outcomes in childhood. The other thing that we did is we stratified by types of nature exposures. As you're aware, kids can be exposed to all kinds of different nature spaces. So residential green space or home green space is really common because it's where kids lived. The next is school green space because that's the other main place kids go. There's a number of others, but for simplicity, we found a high strength of evidence that residential green space promoted health in childhood, and we found a moderate strength of evidence that school green space promoted health in childhood. And the only reason that school green space was moderate was because there weren't enough papers, okay? The evidence is pretty good, but you need more. So take-home message, nature promotes health in children, and residential green space and school green space are the spaces that kids occupy, so are the spaces we really need to see this happening and see this happening. So some strengths and limitations of this. One is the largest systematic literature review to date in this area. It was a multidisciplinary team of psychologists, educators, epidemiologists, clinicians, and we did use a reliable and valid tool to summarize the evidence. The limitation is much of this evidence is cross-sectional, meaning one snapshot in time. They're not giving kids a boost of nature or more exposure and watching them over time. So the snapshot approach has some limitations. There's also a huge amount of variability, types of nature, age ranges of kids, outcomes measures, and the strength of evidence metric is not entirely objective. Okay, so this is gonna we've talked about the good, what we know. This is the bad. That outdoor time and health in childhood, there are all types of recommendations or guidelines, and it's highly variable. So there are national recommendations, there's state level recommendations. There is a typo here, my apologies, Michelle. In California, it's 47 to 60 minutes, not 45 to 60 minutes. But the take-home message here is this is a lot of text to say, roughly, kids should be getting an hour or two of outdoor time per day. And so this is where it starts to feel more bad. So I'm gonna focus on Washington. I'm gonna pose a question to the group. How much outdoor time? We know that kids should be getting in preschool-based settings, 1.5 hours of outdoor time a day. It's a guideline. How much outdoor time do you think Washington preschoolers are getting? Any brave souls in the audience? An hour? Mm-hmm. Any other guesses? Higher or lower?
4 hours.
4 hours? Lower? Okay. 30 minutes. So when we go into these spaces and we look at full day care, on average, kids are getting 30 minutes. So this highlights two things. One, guidelines are important because I think people try to follow them. But I think there's also a missing piece of why are they not being followed consistently? And so that's the less good version of this. Okay. So this is the ugly part of this work, and that is that there are huge inequities in this space. So low-income neighborhoods are 4 to 5 times more likely to not have facilities for outdoor play. Evidence suggests inequities in access to outdoor spaces are rooted in systemic racism. I could give a whole talk on this slide, so I don't want to silver line this at all in terms of this is a one slide, so it's not that important. But I think the last bullet is something that I really want to highlight, and there's this thing called the echogenic effect, which means that the health benefits of green space are stronger in resource-limited communities. So that means the kids who need green space the most benefit the most from having access to green space. And so this is what lights me up when I think about doing this work, is how do I get kids access to spaces? How do I get them to use these spaces? And if I can accomplish those things, then the health benefits will be tremendous. It'll be even greater, okay? So to summarize, nature and kids are better together. Nature promotes health in childhood. From an equity perspective, nature exposure is a right for all kids. If we know nature is good for kids, all kids deserve the benefits, the health benefits specifically, of nature. We also know that outdoor time in school might not align with the policies that are in place, and also that nature elements are key, right? A parking lot, which is outside, is not a park, which has nature elements. So I'm going to move on to part 2. This is what I call the call of significance. What do we do about this systematically? This feels like a big problem. And so I take 2 approaches. One is I do research that expands what we know about mechanism. And why do I care about mechanism? I care about mechanism because it helps inform policy changes. For example, that slide that had all those minutes, right? This state recommends this number of minutes, that state recommends that number of minutes. Those guidelines are driven by outdoor time promoting physical activity. Okay, so the idea is that if kids are outside, they'll be more physically active, and that's good for kids. And so if we know about mechanism, if we know what it does, then it's more likely the guidelines are going to follow. And when I started this work, I spoke with Governor Inslee in Washington State, and he said, what I need to change policy is data about health outcomes specifically. So an example of this is that in July 21st, Washington Senate Bill 5151 was passed. I provided data for that Senate bill and for the evidence that they were using to try and get that bill through, and it passed. And what it does is it licensed outdoor preschools in Washington State. Washington State is the first school to have licensed outdoor preschools. Why does this matter? It matters because when a school is licensed, 1, they can offer 8 hours of care a day, which makes it more accessible for working families, and 2, state-level resources get funneled, so there's more free and reduced tuition. So again, kids who need it the most, it's a pipeline to get them into these outdoor preschools. Okay? On the other side, I do interventions in marginalized communities or historically marginalized communities. The goal here is to, again, get outdoor-based spaces available to people that need it the most, and when I do an intervention, I do something where I leave an outdoor space with the community, so they have something they didn't have before. And I'm going to explain a project called MOID, or More Outside Your Door, in a little bit. But before I go into this, I really want to highlight why schools matter and why a lot of my work is focused on schools. One, it's systematic. So kids attend school, right, in K through 8 and beyond, but 8 is where the oldest that I do right now, and some preschools as well, so Head Start. Kids are in school about 9 months of the year, so it's a large amount of time. And 75% of preschool-age children spend about 35 hours per week in childcare setting. So kids are at school. This is a way for us to provide them with something that is a human right. So I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about a project that I'm doing in Head Starts in Alaska. Again, this is an example of how to get spaces, outdoor spaces, to communities who need them the most. The region that I'm working in is the Yupik region of Alaska. It's about 80% Alaska Native people. Their diet is largely subsistence-based, and they have a few local stores which stocked non-perishables, basically. I'm working with 12 Head Start programs that don't have outdoor spaces to play. Safe outdoor spaces to play would probably be more specific. And it's an intervention that it's very holistic. So there's curriculum changes, there's lifestyle promotion, and then there's outdoor space and time. So in the lower left, this is an example of integrating curriculum. There's a lot of salmon is a really important cultural food. It's also highly available. So this is in a picture of, this is not a Head Start student, but this is a sibling of a Head Start student who's working with salmon, and we will be doing this in the Head Start programs. And on the right, you'll see the geographic variability in terms of which Head Starts we're working in. And I think I want to highlight here the cultural significance of doing this work, that you have to align the work based on cultural significance. So if you look on the far right, you'll see sort of the Yupik season and the traditional activities that happen there. And on the left, you'll see the topic in terms of the curriculum that we're doing. And then with each topic, we have physical activities and outdoor specific activities that align with the cultural Yupik season. Okay. Another question for the audience, because I'm talking a lot, so I want to see what you think. Does anybody recognize this person? Okay. So the reason I ask is this person has been on television. He competes on a show called American Ninja Warrior. His name is Nick Hansen, and he is in the Yupik. He lives in the Yupik region in a little village called Unalakleet. And he is Alaska Native, and he is a local champion for engaging kids in physical activity and specifically outdoor physical activities. And so what he does is he builds play structures with resources in local communities for kids to play on. The picture on the far right is one of the things that he's built. This is clearly not appropriate for 3 to 5-year-old children. Don't, be careful. I'm not suggesting this is, right? But he built this from materials in the village, right? And so what he and I are doing is we're going to these villages, we're having conversations with elders, and Nick is leading this, so I am mostly just a support person for him, but to get a sense of building outdoor structures where little kids can play, older kids can play, because it needs to be community-centered, not just 3 to 5-year-old centered, so that kids can play, they can see older kids playing, so it becomes basically a communal play space for kids. Okay, so that's an applied example of working in a marginalized community and bringing nature or outdoor time to that community. I'm going to shift a little bit to talk about nature and learning, and I want to preface another project that I'm doing with a little bit of background. So we know that nature contact in childhood is associated with improved working memory, academic performance, numeracy, and literacy. And work in this area is accelerating, and evidence is encouraging, but there are some limitations. There's a lot of different outcomes that people measure for learning. There's standardized tests, there's science knowledge, there's just a high degree of variability in this space. And evidence in early childhood is growing, and some of my work is really trying to push the needle in this area. So to provide a little bit of context about this work, I'm trying to think about what can research do to promote system-level change, because I believe that system-level change is equitable change. So I'm partnering with a school in Chicago. It's in South Chicago. It's called the Academy for Global Citizenship. It's part of the Chicago public school system. And we're doing a feasibility pilot study. It's a community that's 97% families and children of color and 75% resource limited. And what I'm pushing the needle on is looking at learning in terms of a broader holistic space of neurocognition and neuroresilience. And I'll get to what that actually means in a little bit. So this is what AGC looks like. So on the far left, this is the bird's eye view. And if you look at the little buildings in kind of the bottom, that's a school. Okay, so that has all the learning spaces, and then on the top, you can't really see it probably, but there's a little building that has a number 8. That number 8 is an outdoor learning space that has walls, but is also used as an outdoor learning space. And on the right, you'll see a picture of what that building looks like. It has a lot of windows. It's actually probably not going to look exactly like this. It's probably going to have like a garage door that raises up and down, so that there's actually one wall that can be just outside space. But this school, I think I am sharing with you today because I think it provides an idea of what we can do to provide access to kids. And my previous example in Alaska was in 3 to 5-year-old kids, and AGC has 4 Head Start classrooms, also goes K through 8. So this is also about expanding the reach into kids that are in the K through 8 area. So part of AGC's mission is to use this outdoor space also as a community hub, so to provide exposure of these these green spaces to community. So this is a neighborhood that is very low in green space, right? And so AGC is building this green space, and so they're making it available to their students, but also to their community. And this is what the community building looks like. And this is the same building that serves as like the outdoor learning space. And I just want to highlight that this is not simply about bringing green space to kids and to communities. It's really a justice issue, or I see it as a justice issue, that nature-based spaces prioritize health justice, environmental justice, educational justice, food justice, right? All of these things, it's bigger than simply a single school in a single city. And it promotes equity. So it doesn't solve racial justice in any way, but it provides a mechanism to do something, okay? So we did a feasibility pilot. We're in the process of that now. We went in November of 2023. We're doing the follow-up this month. And the goal is to really establish the collaboration, to demonstrate feasibility and collect preliminary data. When I work with communities, I make the research really community focused. So I say, what do you need? How can research serve you and promote your work? So AGC was really interested in the neurocognition and neuroresilience outcomes, so we went in that direction because one of the key limitations of prior work is that self-reports are unreliable. So if you ask families or teachers, how much time are these kids getting outside? It's tough, right? Even as parents, you might say, well, my kid's supposed to get an hour and a half of outdoor time at school, but I don't know actually how much they got. And access does not always guarantee exposure. And so in this space, we know how much kids are outside because it's mandated as part of the school curriculum, and we also know the quality and that they're going to it. So I partnered with Dr. Kim Meidenbauer to assess, analyze, and interpret the neurocognitive outcomes, so I want to give her accolades here as well. So this is what it looks like when you're actually in a room. So when you measure neurocognition, you basically put on a fancy swim cap that has electrodes attached, and you can measure on the image on the far left, you can see an image of a brain. And we don't show that to participants when they're actually doing it, but that's what it looks like on our end. And if you look at the picture on the right, you'll see these red and green electrodes. So one is a source, and they're basically little flashlights, very high-powered flashlights. And on the other end, the green, those are detectors, okay? And so the basics, this is called FNIRS, and you get brain activation or neural activation, you get metabolic demand, more blood flow, and particularly more oxygenated blood flow, and that's what those detectors can pick up. So this is a lot like if you were to bolt out of here today, right now, please don't, your muscles would be activated, right? There would be metabolic demand and increased blood flow and increased oxygenated hemoglobin, and we can measure this in brains. And this is just what the graph on the right shows. You can see this influx of oxygenated blood because the brain is demanding it. So I'm really excited to share these results. These are hot off the press. This is the first FNIRS data that has really been done in a school-based setting and particularly specific to nature-based exposures. And so these are brains of kids. And so the red indicates an increase in oxygenated hemoglobin and metabolic demand. This tells us a number of things about feasibility. One, we can do this in school-based settings. We can do this on really little kids, and we can do this all the way up through adolescents. It tells us that increased cognitive demand is happening with kids in response to cognitive tasks. It also tells us which tasks to ask kids to do. So we asked kids to do sort of from really simple things up to some complex things, and now we know what is too hard and what is too easy. So you sort of find the sweet spot for your population. So this is exciting because I think this is a tool that a number of researchers could use in the future in this space. So results. So I want to pause for a second and explain sort of the interpretation here. And the idea is, the analogy I use is temperature. So if it's 115 degrees outside, you've been on a hike for 3 hours, you ran out of water an hour ago. When you get back to the car, if I say to you, hey, let's do some cognitive tasks, that might be a little tricky, right? Or if you're in minus 20 degree weather and you've been outside for 6 hours, performing cognitively when you're too hot or really too cold, you're just not going to perform as well as you might typically. And so kids' brains, kids who are exposed to microaggressions and poverty and food insecurity, those are accumulating challenges that I think increase the temperature of their brain. They change the way the brain is just in a resting state. And that impacts cognition and learning and development and all the things that we are here about today, right? So my goal is to cool the temperature in kids' brains so that they can learn and engage and play. And I think one of the ways to do that is to expose them to nature-based settings. So that's the premise. So here, in terms of interpretation, red equals low cognitive effort or load. So that means that it's easier for me to do something. Purple means there's a higher cognitive load. And this is in response to a simple task, things that should be pretty straightforward for these kids. And what we found was that kids with more supportive neighborhood environments and amenities, things like parks, sidewalks, access to outdoor spaces, use less cognitive effort to complete the task. To me, what that tells me, and I want to premise this is a feasibility pilot. This is not a huge sample size. But it tells me that kids' brains are a little cooler when they have access to these spaces. Same parameters, except here we're looking at outdoor time on the weekends. And so here, kids with more weekend outdoor time use less cognitive effort, again, to complete the tasks. That, to me, is really promising. It tells me that outdoor spaces and built environment influences kids' brains. So when they show up in a school, they're either ready or less ready to really engage and learn and do all the things that we want them to do. Some astute observers might have noticed that there's, in the middle, there's outdoor time at school. Why are we not seeing anything in the outdoor time at school? Do not worry. This is baseline data, right? So we went to these kids in their school before they really had exposure to the outdoor space in this school. We're going to go back at the end of this month, and see how the outdoor space that they've been exposed to for the last 6 to 9 months change their brains. Okay? So I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask you what seems like maybe a random question. Does anybody know what the most popular TED Talk is of all time? I didn't either. I stumbled upon this. So the most popular TED Talk of all time is titled, "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" This was a little bit of a shocker for me. This TED Talk has now been viewed 76 million times. So a lot of people are interested in education and creativity, as it turns out. Because if you're not interested, you're not going to watch it. And this TED Talk I strongly encourage watching it. It was done by Sir Ken Robinson, who has since passed. But his take-home message is that in a school-based space, we are prioritizing numeracy and literacy, and numeracy and literacy, and numeracy and literacy, and other priorities are falling by the wayside. Arts, humanity. His take-home message is that creativity is as important as numeracy and literacy. And he had me convinced. So I did a little bit of detective work. And as it turns out, creativity is highly applauded in many adult spaces. The Harvard Business School, the Harvard Business Review, Stanford Medicine, Forbes. It is easy to find information about how creativity is essential for leadership, for medicine, for law, for business. But yet, how are we supposed to foster this creativity in adulthood if we're not fostering it in childhood? Nature is a potential solution. So nature is known to promote curiosity, flexibility, imagination, and creativity. When you take human beings outside for 4 days in a nature-based setting, we see a 50% increase in creativity. That is good news, because that is something that we can change. From an early childhood perspective, there's a little bit less information, but it's still available. Natural outdoor classrooms promote creativity in preschool-aged children. There's 4 key features. Predictable spaces, meaning they're consistently available and kids know them. They have ample and consistent time. 10 minutes isn't going to cut it. They need to be able to spend time in those spaces. They need to have open-ended and natural materials, things that they can be creative and imaginative with. Sticks can become so many things. Leaves can be so many things. Dirt can become so many things, right? And they also need teachers who support creative play and learning. So I think I want to pause here and say, I don't think the solution is just to make outdoor spaces available. That's key, but also teachers need professional development and training in terms of how to be in those spaces with kids, how to promote kids being creative and flexible in those spaces. So the bottom line here is that research that expands what we know about mechanism can inform policy change. I think that's really important. Doing intervention in marginalized communities now is important because we're getting those marginalized communities access to spaces that they have not had previously. And creativity matters. It matters in adulthood, it matters in childhood, just as much as literacy and numeracy. So we're going to move on to a slightly lighter topic. So I want to end on a slightly higher note, and that's, what does fun have to do with all of this? Because nature is really important. We're all here for children. That's sort of a collective space that we're in, but fun matters too. So I want you to pause for a minute and remember a time in childhood when you had so much fun. And I want to get just raise your hand if that memory, there was an outdoor space to it. So that is a really common response, meaning that we feel like we are having fun often in these memories when we're outside. And that is not just frivolous. That actually really, really matters. So, segue, have you ever tried to hurry a 3-year-old? Like, okay, we gotta go. Like, come on, we gotta, like, all the parents and educators, right? Hurrying a 3-year-old is just something. There is so much to see. There is so much wonder. Worms, rocks, ants. It doesn't even matter, and yet it matters, right? And so I think about this all the time. And recently I thought about, what would kids say? Have you ever, like, imagine a kid committee. Like, you know, parents, after the kids have gone to bed and you're having a glass of wine, and you're like, oh, I'm getting them to school and then home, and then imagine kids being like, have you ever tried to slow a grown-up down? They're just like, constant, there's so much to do, there's so much to accomplish, it's like busy, 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 hustle. And I wonder why we have abandoned wonder. And I ask you to reflect on that because I think it matters in this space between being adults in an adult world and caring so deeply about children and childhood that we pause to think about wonder. In January of this year, something exciting happened. The Canadian Pediatric Society released a position statement. The Canadian Pediatric Society is basically the analog of the American Academy of Pediatrics. It is the governing body in Canada that prioritizes health of children. And they published a position statement about healthy childhood development through outdoor risky play. This is big because it is an important vetting, meaning that medically, these are people whose their whole job is medically taking care of children and promoting the health of children, are saying outdoor risky play is essential, okay? And I've highlighted 2 sections, mostly because we're in an early childhood space here, but it expands beyond early childhood. It expands to childhood. So whether it's early childhood or transitional kindergarten or elementary or middle, etc., right? This is important. And they highlight supporting ECEs in doing this work and making sure it happens. I'm not going to read the text to you. This information will be available elsewhere, but I just want to highlight that this is a recommendation from a really important organizing group of people who care about children deeply. And I'm hoping the American Academy of Pediatrics follows suit. So I have recently become more aware of Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. She is a professor of psychology at UNC Chapel Hill, and she studies positive emotions. But one of the things that she studies more recently is fun, and how fun truly is not frivolous. That fun is a definition, involves playfulness, play, which we just talked about a minute ago, connection with people, and flow. And flow is the absence of distraction, is how she defines it. She suggests that fun makes us more productive. It makes us more creative, and it boosts resilience, And it actually has, it reverses the effects of stress. So for example, if I'm measuring cortisol in kids, it not only boosts the resilience, but it reduces their cortisol, right? And the chronic effects thereof. And so this is a plug. Again, this could be a whole talk, but for how play and risky play, outdoor play, has been a priority from a health and medical perspective, how fun is also making its way into becoming more mainstream as something that's critical for kids. And if you think about it for a second, right? When you're having fun, you're learning. Like many of us can remember a teacher who really changed our lives, right? Really made a difference. And usually that's because they made learning fun. For me, it was physics. Physics was not super exciting for me, but I had a physics professor who just made it wildly, outlandishly fun. And so, okay, I was along for the ride. I was interested because I was having fun. So, and I want to end with wonder. And I'm summarizing I'm quoting Rachel Carson because I think she said it best. And I'm not going to read this whole quote, but I'm going to read part of it. If I had influence with the good fairy who was supposed to preside over the christening of all children, I should ask that her gift to each child in the world be a sense of wonder so indestructible that it would last throughout life, as an unfailing antidote against the boredom and disenchantment of later years, the alienation from the sources of our strength. And I want to remind the group and the audience today that kids are by design curious and creative. Let's not squander this extraordinary capacity. We are educating kids out of their creative capacities, and that nature exposure is an intuitive and viable solution. So I'm near the end, and you're going to be surprised that I'm going to be talking about video games here, but I am. And bear with me here, because I have a point. So Ben Brode is a video game designer. He's the Chief Development Officer of Second Dinner, which is a video game company. He was interviewed in a search engine podcast recently about what makes video games sticky. Sticky in the world of video games is politically correct terminology for addictive. So what does he think about when making an addictive video game? Right? And he is wildly successful. This video game, Snap Marvel, has won a whole lot of awards. His method is that it's low bar of entry. Anyone can get it and play it pretty quickly, and it's fun. Uh-oh. Right? There's a balance of skill and luck, meaning you need to acquire some skill, but you can also get lucky. And also that people who are involved in video games take a beginner's mindset. Like they're constantly thinking about how we can do this better. So if we get kids into nature-based settings, it is a low bar of entry. Kids will go. They like to be outside. It is fun. There's a balance of luck and skill. You can get really good at knowing how to find bugs, but you can also learn how to find bugs. Just this morning, a kid showed me a chrysalis. Like, I looked at the bush, I couldn't see the chrysalis, but kid walked over, he was like, oh yeah, it's right there. You got it, right? And having a beginner's mindset, consistently thinking about how this can be better, hearing from kids how it can be better, hearing from teachers how it can be better, hearing from policymakers how it can be better. So really bringing all the perspectives and expertise to the table to really make it better for kids. And that school-based policies and opportunities are key because kids are there so much of the time. So why does this matter? We're almost at the end, and I think why it matters, like the why, is really important. And I'm going to lean on my colleagues and friends at the Children in Nature Network because I think they've said it best. There's no app for this. There's not an app for wonder. Kids won't remember their best day on YouTube. Right? Like this resonates, right? And big picture, I think often about One Health, which really is an interplay of human health, environmental health, and animal health. If we can teach kids to respect and prioritize and be a partner with natural spaces, we are promoting environmental health. If we promote environmental health, we're promoting health of animals. And that this really synergizes environmental justice, animal justice, and human justice. So at the end of the day, I do not believe success is linear. That's what most people think it looks like. I think it looks like the picture on the right, that really success is a compilation of short stories, of chapters. and that nature and kids are better together. We are aware of this ecogenic effect, that kids who need it the most benefit the most, that we can all do something today. Even if it just means sitting outside on your front step for 5 minutes and feeling the sun on your face, or planting a tomato plant that's been on your back porch, right? Collaborate equitably. Our differences make us stronger. Collaborate with people who are different than us. Keep a learning mindset for change. Think about the video game people and how they're so successful, and try and do that as well. Try it, right? Like, what can make this better? Is it a low bar of entry and is it fun? And is there a combination of skill and luck? And remember that creativity is essential in human learning, and we need to lean into play and fun and wonder. Science is a team effort. These amazing humans are part of my heart and soul, so I just want to say thank you also to the organizations that have supported my work and have also been deep and tremendous partners in crime. And I'm going to end with my favorite poem called Make the Ordinary Come Alive. Do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is a way of foolishness. Help them instead to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand. And make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself. Thank you.